Helen McCourt, 1988, Billinge. She was 5 minutes from home, then gone. Some disappearances do not begin with darkness. They begin with routine. A young woman finishes work, calls home, catches the same kind of transport she has taken before, and steps off close to the streets she knows. Nothing about that moment seems dangerous. Nothing tells her family that the next few minutes will become the center of a case that will haunt them for decades. On the evening of February 9th, 1988, Helen McCourt was on her way home to Billinge, near St. Helens in Merseyside, England. She was 22 years old, an insurance clerk working in Liverpool, and she had plans later that night. Her mother, Marie McCourt, was expecting her. Her younger brother, Michael, would soon come home and find the house changing from concern into panic. Helen was only a short walk from home when she disappeared. Her body has never been found. Billinge was not the kind of place where Helen could simply fade into a crowd. It was a village community with familiar roads, churches, local pubs, and bus routes that many residents used every day. Helen's route home brought her close to a pub called the George and Dragon, later known as the Billinge Arms. The landlord was Ian Sims, a local man in his early 30s, married and the father of 2 young children. To most people passing by, the pub was just another landmark on the road, but investigators would soon discover that Helen's connection to that building was far from ordinary. Helen lived with her family, and according to those closest to her, she was reliable. Marie knew her daughter's habits well. Helen was not someone who would vanish without making contact. On the afternoon she disappeared, Helen telephoned her mother from work shortly before she was due to leave Liverpool. She said she wanted her tea ready earlier than usual because she planned to go out later with her boyfriend. It was a small, ordinary request, the kind of detail that would later become painful because it showed one thing clearly: Helen expected to come home. The weather that day was rough, with strong winds affecting parts of the region. When Helen failed to appear at first, there were still innocent explanations. Maybe travel had been delayed. Maybe transport problems had slowed her journey. Marie heard reports of a tree falling on a railway line and checked whether that could have affected Helen's route. But as the evening went on, the simple answers began to disappear. Helen's workplace hadn't seen her. Friends hadn't heard from her. Hospitals had no news. The distance between the bus stop and her home was too short for so much silence. At around 5:15 in the evening, Helen got off a bus in Billinge. That is one of the last known points in the timeline. From there, she should have walked along a route that took her near the George and Dragon. Within minutes, a man leaving another bus heard a loud scream. It was sudden, and then it stopped. The sound seemed to come from the direction of the pub. After that moment, no confirmed sighting placed Helen alive anywhere else. 2 days before the disappearance, Helen had been involved in a heated argument inside the George and Dragon. After that incident, Ian Sims banned her from the pub. Witnesses later described him speaking about her with anger and obscene language. There were also accounts that he had made unwanted sexual advances toward Helen, which she rejected. He was believed to have feared that Helen knew about an affair he was having with a younger woman and that she might have been talking about it. None of this alone explained what happened on February 9th, but once Helen vanished after passing near the pub, those earlier tensions took on a different meaning. Back at the McCourt home, Marie's worry intensified. By 7 o'clock, Helen was still missing. Her boyfriend came by around 8 and he had not seen her either. Marie contacted hospitals, friends, and Helen's workplace. Eventually, she went to the police. At first, the response was cautious. A young adult missing for a few hours could be delayed, out with friends, or held up by the weather. But Marie insisted that Helen was not like that. Helen would have called. As the night stretched on, Marie kept contacting police, unable to shake the certainty that something was wrong. In the early hours of the morning, detectives arrived at the house. The atmosphere changed. This was no longer only a worried mother searching for a delayed daughter. It was the beginning of a major investigation. Ian Sims soon came under scrutiny. When police questioned him, they noticed he appeared extremely nervous. They also saw fresh scratches on his neck. Those observations were not enough for a case, but then officers searched his car and the investigation moved sharply in one direction. In the boot, forensic scientists found traces of Helen's blood. They also found an earring. The earring was significant because Marie recognized it. It was part of a pair she had given Helen for her 21st birthday. Helen had been wearing the earrings on the day she disappeared. Then investigators found the butterfly clip from that earring in the carpet of a back bedroom in Sims' flat above the pub. The evidence was no longer only outside on a road or near a bus stop, it was inside the building Helen would have passed on her way home. Forensic work inside the flat uncovered more disturbing signs. Blood and hair linked to Helen were found on carpet. Blood was also found at the foot of stairs leading to the apartment and on wallpaper near an outside door. Police believed Helen had been attacked there and struck in the face. On the banister rail of the stairs leading towards the bedroom, investigators found Ian Sims' left forefinger print in blood. At this stage, the evidence suggested violence, but the absence of Helen's body created a challenge. A murder case without a body can be difficult to prove because the prosecution must establish not only that a person was killed, but that the defendant was responsible. In Helen's case, the physical traces began forming a chain that investigators could follow. In March, around 20 miles away near Earlham, Helen's belongings were found on a riverbank. Her handbag, coat, scarf, trousers, underwear, and mittens were inside a black bin liner. That bin liner was linked to a roll from Sims's pub. Also found with the clothing was a cotton jacket that Sims admitted belonged to him. It had blood on both sleeves and hair from Helen's head. A fiber from her mittens was found in one of its pockets. Near the Manchester Ship Canal at Hollands Green, a man walking his dog discovered a blood-stained towel. Later, a second towel and men's clothing were found nearby. The blood was identified as Helen's. One item of clothing carried a Labatt beer logo, a brand associated with the George and Dragon. Sims initially denied the clothing was his, but his wife and mistress identified the items and his explanation shifted. Then investigators recovered a length of electrical flex with Helen's clothing. Similar flex was found in Sims's flat. The piece recovered near Earlham had canine teeth marks matched to Sims's dog's. Human hair caught in a knot was linked to Helen's rollers. Investigators believed the flex may have been used to strangle her. The prosecution case grew from these details: blood, hair, fibers, the earring, clothing, bin liners, and the trail from Billinge toward the canal area. There was no recovered body, no confession, and no final resting place for Helen. But the evidence was building around one man. At his trial in 1989, Ian Sims denied murdering Helen. His defense suggested that someone else must have entered his flat, taken his clothes, used his car, attacked Helen, disposed of evidence, and framed him. Sims admitted he had been in the pub during the crucial period between late afternoon and early evening, but he denied knowing what had happened. The jury heard the forensic case. At the time, DNA fingerprinting was still a relatively new tool in British criminal investigations. Scientists compared blood found in Sims's flat, clothing, and car with blood samples from Helen's parents. The match showed that the blood was consistent with coming from a child of Helen's parents, with the odds first described as 126,000 to 1 against it being otherwise. Later advances in testing strengthened those odds even further. The jury convicted Ian Sims of murder. He was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 16 years. The case became one of the early examples in the United Kingdom of a murder conviction secured through DNA evidence without the discovery of the victim's body. For many families, a conviction marks the moment when the search for legal truth ends. For the McCourt family, it opened another long chapter. Sims maintained his innocence. He did not reveal where Helen's remains were hidden. Marie was left with a verdict, but no grave. Over the following years, Helen's family kept searching. They looked through fields, woods, waterways, ditches, ponds, and old mine shafts. Divers were used. Ponds were drained. Diggers excavated areas where there might be answers. Michael, Helen's younger brother, searched with relatives and later joined the police. The search became part of the family's life, a repeated journey between hope and devastation. In 2013, police acted on information suggesting Helen may have been placed into an open grave at St. Aidan's Church in Billinge around the time she disappeared. The idea was deeply painful, but it had to be checked. Under Operation Longhorn, officers exhumed the grave. The search found no trace of Helen. For Marie, it was another possible ending taken away. Marie Court then turned her grief into a campaign that reached beyond her own family. In 2015, she began pushing for a legal change that would become known as Helen's Law. The idea was that parole boards should take into account whether a convicted killer refuses to reveal the location of a victim's remains. The campaign was not only about Ian Sims, it was about families trapped in the same kind of uncertainty, unable to bury someone they loved because the person convicted of the crime remained silent. In 2019, the parole board decided that Sims had met the test for release. They considered his behavior, age, risk factors, and reports from professionals. Marie fought the decision and sought legal action to prevent it, but in February 2020, after more than 30 years in prison, Sims was released on license. He still had not disclosed where Helen was. Later that year, Helen's Law received royal assent in England and Wales. The law requires the parole board to consider the anguish caused when offenders refuse to disclose the location of a victim's remains. It was a major achievement, born from Marie's decades of campaigning, but for Helen's family, it came after Sims had already left prison. Ian Sims died in June 2022. He died without revealing the location of Helen McCourt's body. Marie said she hoped that someone who knew something might now come forward, someone from his past, from prison, or from his circle who had stayed silent while he was alive. The case of Helen McCourt is not unresolved in the courtroom. A man was convicted. A sentence was passed. The forensic evidence helped shape legal history, but the human mystery remains. Helen left work, called home, stepped off a bus, and disappeared only a short walk from safety. Her family never received the one answer that could allow them to lay her to rest. Helen was a daughter, a sister, and a young woman with plans that evening. Her story is remembered not only because of the evidence that convicted Ian Sims, but because of the silence that followed. Somewhere, Helen McCourt remains undiscovered. And until she is found, the final part of her story is still missing.